Welcome back to Up Next in Commerce. I'm Stephanie Postles, CEO of Mission.org. And today I took a trip into the virtual world with Barry Hoffman, the Chief Strategy Officer at ZeroLight. Barry told me all about the gaming principles that e-commerce brands should be thinking about right now in their own digital strategies. And we got into the future of holograms, VR, and the advancements of visualization technology in the world of e-commerce. Enjoy today's episode. Before we jump into the interview, I want to give a quick shout out to our partners, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, who help make this podcast possible. You can learn more about Salesforce Commerce Cloud by visiting salesforce.com/commerce. All right, let's jump into it. You were just mentioning, being in the video game space before anyone else. And I want to hear more about that because it's a very unique perspective. And I've not had any guests on the show talk about, being in the space that early. So like I said before, you're the OG in this space. I want to hear your insights and more about that.
I don't know. I was watching a new series on HBO Max this week, and it's called The Gilded Age. Yeah, and I was watching that episode, and there's a lady and a gentleman are sitting, and they're watching one of those magical candles. Where the picture, and then there's another picture being stuck in, magic camera.
Yep.
And that's sort of where commerce is today. We're putting in pictures, and then if somebody clicks on another button, then another picture comes in. So that's sort of like where, if you go to a website, that's what a website is today. If you then revert back to where gaming was already, remember when I started in it, I started professionally in it in 2004, and probably as a consumer in 1986 or something like that. It has always gone from like a 2D flat surface slowly into something you could interact with 3D objects. So, and the interaction on top of having high fidelity graphics is what makes gaming different from actually commerce space. If you then look at what we did before, we used to make racing games, it's all about the experience. It's all about a sense of speed. And at one point, I think it was around a little bit before 2010, where we started building online racing platform. And we were thinking, can we actually sell cars from an online game? And that was back in the day. It was already an online racing world. And the funny thing is, that didn't work out because people come to an online game to experience racing in a virtual state. They're not coming there to buy a car.
They're not ready to buy.
But what we were successful in is actually finding out that we could use gaming technology for selling cars. And then that's where we ended up in 2012, Tata, which is the Indian company. They're the mother company of JLR nowadays. They just acquired JLR, and they wanted to rebrand them and come up with some concept that was never done before. A massive car on screen, and then with Kinect, so that you could do Minority Report on screen and that kind of stuff. Said, can you guys do that? And we said, yeah, of course. Building games for decades. We can do everything, with a bit of bravura. So we go in there, we build that thing, and in 2013, in Paris Motor Show, there was this incredibly looking thing. And then all of a sudden, you have other car companies coming out of the woodwork, saying, oh, what you built there, can you build that for us? So we did hundreds of Audi showrooms where big screens represented the car, not only in the car that was in the showroom, this one physical object, but actually in all the choices that were available there. And those choices were trillions. So you could never put them in a piece of paper.
This is great. It's having my mind race to think about first, how many opportunities are in other industries that can be applied to commerce. I mean, the gaming industry, like you're highlighting, is the perfect space where it's they're so far advanced when it comes to certain technologies and how they're highlighting, anything in that space and taking that technology and then moving it over to commerce. I mean, before we even jump into ZeroLight, I just want to hear what other opportunities do you think there are that maybe the gaming industry is doing right now that could be actually applicable in commerce?
I think, that's a great question. When we started working with cars, it was almost natural because we were always in that domain space, our domain expertise was cars because we were doing car racing. But at the same time, people who worked for us also worked on games like Assassin's Creed, and things which were far removed from that. So it was not necessarily our only know-how. But at the same time, we said, let's do something we know, which is in our DNA. There was cars. So we did there. But as you said, there's many other games, which you can think of. But the first thing you have to think about is what is a game? It's sort of 3D objects. It's like it's set up like that. It's 3D objects in a space or a range of spaces or a range of scenes. And you actually move from scene to scene and you can interact with the scene. And if the interaction is fun, then actually it might turn into a game. Otherwise, it's basically just walking around in a space, which is a bit like all the discussion about metaverses and that kind of stuff. Like all of a sudden, everybody walking in a space is a metaverse again. No, in the end, like it needs to be fun. You need to have a reason to be there. Like if we talk about
Yeah. You're not just going to wander around
exactly,
aimlessly.
if you think about commerce, if you think about a shopping street, why do you go to a shopping street? Because it's fun. There's something there you want to do. You're not going there just to aimlessly wander. If you want to aimlessly wander or you want to get your 10,000 steps a day, you're going into the forest near Los Gatos where I live or wherever you live. That is nice.
I know.
You're not using, so everything has its own space. So we've been exploring, of course, the other objects or the other products as well. And what we saw was that it's a convergence of a range of things. One is, of course, like the gaming technology and being able to show high fidelity graphics on screen that are so believable that almost when you see it, you want to touch it and you can almost smell the leather or you can almost like feel the stitches if you go over it. And that's where it becomes more than just seeing. It becomes like all your senses are appearing. That's one thing. So high fidelity. So for instance, with NVIDIA and a range of other technical high-end partners coming out with real-time ray tracing, where, for instance, like the shadows rightly appearing when the object is in the space, it feels more that the object is really in the space instead of sort of like floating in space. That's super important. At the same time, it is the GPUs, graphical processing units. Are they actually strong enough to push that onto your screen? And at first it was only in a gaming computer. Nowadays we have more and more servers, so that those two things coming together allowed us to come up with this very high-end graphics that normally only could do done like a PC, like I have standing next to me. I could bring them together. And then there is like the range of, do you know how you should interact with things? Like does everybody know how to deal with controllers, or does everybody know how to deal with voice? Like that's not there yet. So you need to come up with simple ways of how you interact with things. Like for instance, do you look at a camera position? Cameras are an important thing. Controllers are an important thing. New. So the more and more we have that, the more and more the cost goes down of the compute, the more smaller products are able to be actually presented in the same way like we do with cars.
Wow. This is definitely really cool to think about how these completely separate industries could probably converge in a very interesting way that really hasn't been thought about outside of ZeroLight. So maybe first, actually, if you do the high level of like, what exactly is ZeroLight for anyone who doesn't know?
Well, basically ZeroLight is a leader in the real-time visualization for marketing and sales in the automotive industry. So basically what we have is like, if you normally look at a car on a website of a company and you want to interact with that car, often it's a picture and that's about it. And those pictures normally have to be created by hand, 100% by hand. And that takes a lot of time. And what we have done is we've created a range of tools to make the creation of pictures, videos, panoramic shots, AR models a lot easier and faster, so that either you can automatically already create them and put them on your platform, or if you want to give them the finishing touch, then the artist can actually do that extra bit instead of having to create them from scratch. And at the same time, we have a platform which is also allowing you to represent a stream of that car, so that you can either show it on a screen or in VR or in AR in such a way that it looks like a computer game, but then at a super high-end level. That's what ZeroLight does. There's a lot of different companies we work with. We work with a lot of like partners, like Amazon, for instance, on the cloud structures, like Salesforce, for instance, on the commerce side of things. And all these things combined allow that not just the visualization, that picture is just there, you click on a button and then there's another color, but that all those other systems, they can do the pricing at the same time. They can look in their inventory, whether there's actually a product there. And that's how we combine things together to create a commerce platform.
Wow. Okay. So outside of automotive, is there an opportunity for brands to be thinking about using this kind of technology to highlight their products in a better way? Because right now, I mean, you were mentioning the metaverse earlier, there's all these virtual shopping experiences. And I still feel like what is always lacking is like, that doesn't look real, or does this product even have to look real? Like maybe certain products you need that, like cars and all the features, and you want to interact with it and look at it. And maybe certain products actually don't need this because you make it worse when you
Mhm.
try and make it look good and it
Mhm.
actually looks worse. So like, what's your view on how commerce brands can be thinking about tapping into technology like this without actually making it a worse customer experience, which is what I've
Yeah.
kind of seen here and there. Where they try and I'm like, oh, that's like a C effort right
No,
there.
no, that's true. I think for cars, when it has to be on brand, it needs to be the highest quality. You can't get away from that, because like,
Hmm.
but at the same time, what you see is that brands start to experiment with new emergent platforms. Like if you look at TikTok, like where they start understanding it cannot just be another video without allowing a little bit of user freedom, like that kind of stuff, which
Hmm.
is pretty cool. Like if a brand allows them to do that, that's definitely cool. At the same time, what we see, and again, it goes to the quality, high quality fidelity. You can only get that by actually aiming for that high quality. You can get quality already in at a reasonable transactional level for a product. At the same time, what you're
Yep.
saying, can you get away with lower quality, for certain products? I would say it's not maybe necessarily the products, but it's maybe the use case. And what we're doing for a lot of companies is already brochures, where
Hmm.
instead of just having a PDF brochure as a representation of the paper brochure, which I think is always ridiculous, people come up with what's
Yep.
the analog of a paper brochure? Well, let's do a PDF. That's missing the point a little bit. What digital can do, like so. We came up
Hmm.
with much more digital interaction. So at least there's a use where you want to go digital. The next stage is, for instance, uh, manuals. Like if you have like a car manual,
Yep.
and in that car
Yep.
manual, it doesn't necessarily have to look on brand. If you can, perfect. But sometimes it's better if you can make it functional. And some
Mhm.
of the things what I can explain, like for one brand, we, for instance, were showing how the coffee cup holder was working. Super rudimentary. But if you then do the coffee
Yep.
cup holder, do you put a coffee cup in there, which is like from Starbucks, from Pete's, like from home? So instead of having that
Mhm.
discussion, which coffee cup it needs to be, it's better to have like a generic, almost translucent hologram of what looks like a thing. And then your own mind can make up what that has to look like. So that's where you can actually have
Mhm.
a lot more license of freedom, because if you don't do it absolutely right, you get into that uncanny valley and then people think it's fake.
Yep.
But if you do it in a way that people think, oh, that's a hologram, that's functional, that's where you can get away with it. Yep.
Mhm. Okay, how often are you guys tapping into, like, using hologram technology? Because this is something where I'm like, I feel like I've seen it here and there, especially with, like, a person up on stage, like, walking around as a hologram, and I'm like, "Oh, is that here? Like, is that technology ready to be tapped into yet?"
Yeah. I'm, I always like, the funny thing is like, there's various types of holograms, like if you could say an AR representation in your phone could be seen as a hologram as well. It's just that you look through your
Mhm.
phone and then you see an object in living space. Then I think that's the most successful
Yep.
form of, if you would call it a hologram. I've seen, of course, like
Okay.
light field projections and those kind of things, like what Magic Leap and
Mhm.
HoloLens are doing. And I think within the functional space, they definitely currently have a space, like I've seen really good use cases in the marketing and sales space. What is often the problem is that they don't represent black in the right way. It's almost like to represent black in a way how television sets used to do it in the 80s and early 90s.
Mhm.
Black was more like
Yep.
grayish. And if you think about the fact that you
Mhm.
want to sell a certain paint, black paint on your car, then it doesn't represent
Yep.
well. And
It's
that's
gray.
where you say, okay, let's not do the hologram. Then maybe it works as a, like we're a high-tech brand and it's an enabler and then it's a gadget, but it's not yet ready to be
Mhm.
that sales tool. That's a palette for the salesperson and for the, like configure it. Yeah. What you see is what you get. It's not
Yeah,
yet
yeah.
WYSIWYG. Let's call it that way. Yeah.
Ah, bummer. I was hoping it was there, and I just didn't know
No,
about it yet.
I've seen
But
representations which are
that's
very good, but they need a very big PC attached to it. If you want to go mobile,
yep.
which allows for higher adoption rates, the computer's just not
Mhm.
able enough to do it via that. So maybe Cloud XR will do a lot more with it, like that. There's all kind of things converging at the
Yeah.
moment, but it's not yet there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully soon. So it was interesting earlier when you were mentioning how a lot of brands kind of get stuck in this like analog
Hmm. Hmm.
mindset. And I mean, humans in general, it's like we keep doing things the way we've always done them. And so when thinking about approaching a brand and being like, hey, stop sending PDFs, like let's actually send something that's more
Mhm.
digitized and better. Like, what do you see maybe brands doing today like that, where you're like, that's an old way of thinking and you're like working with them to like think newer and like add technology to it and make something more, digital. Is there any examples around
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Apart from the brochure we just talked about, I think that's a
Yeah.
great example. And thankfully, we work with brands like, for instance, Cadillac, where they stepped into it and they really wanted to have that interactive experience. And also Lucid, for instance, uses that.
Mhm.
I think another nice experience is, for instance, with Lucid, they have something called Lucid Studio Live, where they say, we want people to look at a configurator, but we also want to allow them to work with a salesperson who's in a digital sales desk. And instead of then doing like what we do, like a Teams call or a Google Hangouts call, and then I'm going to film the car
Yeah.
behind me and this is the car and look at the car and then it looks all blocky and you hope that somebody sees it and they think, yeah, I can see it as well. But in the end, nobody sees it, of course. What we do is basically we send
Yeah.
a stream of that car and that car looks absolutely bright and good. And then we allow them to look at the same car at the same time without putting them in that space themselves, because some people start putting avatars in there and then they put the avatar in front of the car. And I think, yeah, that's all very nice, but what's it about? Is it about the car or about the avatar? So you can also,
Yeah.
there's one way of underusing technology and there's a way of overusing technology. Like let's stack everything on top of it and then let's call it something, like that's, so
Yep.
that's, I think, another example.
I can definitely see you see some companies like trying to use every piece
Mhm,
of new technology and
mhm.
name out there. And I think that's a very good point of like, don't overuse it, especially if it's not solving a problem. Like, it's great if you want to put an avatar in something. Okay, make a little mini Sims world, but is that actually going to get down to what you want to do? Like, what are your goals? If you want to sell a car, don't add in extra pieces
Or,
into the process that
or
actually just
if you
distract
do
a bit.
it, know why you do it. Like, for instance, from the again, when we
Yeah.
talked about the games industry, there was a way why certain, like for instance, if you have an avatar, like in a game, the avatar is you are the hero. So that thing is in the middle.
Mhm.
But if you look at, for instance, certain
Yeah.
games like shooter games, which sometimes they are switched to the left of the side so that the rest of the screen
Mhm.
space is actually completely enabled. So that means on the left side, you still see almost like a heads-up display. You see your avatar, so you can enjoy that it's your virtual identity there. But it does not take away from being
Mhm.
in the middle, standing in front of the object that you want to do commerce with. Because in the end, if it's about commerce,
Yep.
you want to sell, you want to market, you want to do something that entices people, that engage them, converts them. Like that's what
Yep.
commerce is about, isn't it? So yeah, cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. When thinking about the gaming
Mhm.
industry, I mean, are there ever like key gaming development principles that you kind of think back to as you're, moving forward with ZeroLight or working with clients? Because I mean, it seems like there's a lot of overlap in the way to think about things like the example you just mentioned around like there's a way to do it. It's just go back to the gaming example of like it can have an avatar there, but put it off to the side. But I want to hear how your mind thinks when you're moving forward with these brands and like how often are you kind of thinking back to these gaming principles that you kind of grew up
Yeah.
around?
No, that's good. Like before I went into the games industry, I was the head of customer intelligence of Orange, a big telco company. And we were always looking at the needs
Mhm.
of customers. The whole thing was built on needs. We want to be customer first and all those things. Great, and we were able to build small niches around that were, exciting customers. If you then go into the
Mhm.
next, I stepped into the games industry and I was trying to think, should I take a look at that from the same principle, like customer needs? And the games industry at that time was still looking at, let's build a big design Bible. Every thought we have, we drop it in the design Bible, then we start building for 5 years and we got a game. And I think once we started combining that, I looked at research, and everybody should take a look at that research. It's very old, but it's from a gentleman who used to be at Stanford back in the days. His name was Nicky, and he did something called the Daedalus Project. And it was such a great
Okay.
thing because it was like an analogy to what I did already in the telco industry. And basically what he said is like, there's three pillars towards a game, or let's call it an interactive experience, because I use that as still to answer your first question. What is a game? A game is social, a game has immersion, and a game has competition. Those are the three things: social,
Mhm.
immersion, and competition. And then the question is, in each experience that you build, there's all kind of subgroups, and I can send you that one as well. I need to dig it out somewhere, but I constantly think
Yeah.
like for instance, if you
Yes.
think about competition, there's like multiple brands of competition, like it could be player versus player, it could be leaderboards, it could be, like all those things that drive competition or drive engagement. So at one point we were using a leaderboard in a concept for CES 2019, where we said, how unique is your configuration of your car compared to all the other configurators that they've done? And then people could choose, do I like a unique or a non-unique way? So in a way you start thinking, can I use that sub need in the same way? So that's how you can take a look at it. Like in immersion as well, you've got escapism, you've got narrative, you've got all those things. Social, you can think about the fact, does it always need to have a chat box? Because now chat box sounds like, okay, if you do a virtual world, you need to have a chat box. But hey, sometimes that's only nice if you build up a community and if you have people to manage that community. And I did quite a few of those things, like in the days, but that's where people spend hours. If you've got a commerce moment, you don't have hours. You've got we've got some applications where people spend more than 40 minutes on average in, but at the same time, maybe it's just when you can sit with 1 or 2 or 3 people, you've got voice enabled, you set your Discord on, just like you do with games, and you can just have a conversation. You don't need a chat box. Constantly you need to weave in those primary needs, social, competition, immersion, and then look at each of those sub branches to sort of see how do those needs fill in. And of course, there is, of course, at the same time, you can take a look at what are the technical capabilities of all those commerce platforms, let's take an SAP or a Salesforce, like a combination of inventory with CRM tools, with marketing automation, and how can we then use those automated messaging in combination with new input and outputs, like voice. I love voice, but sometimes voice is just not good enough. But when it's good enough, it's amazing. So how can you combine that into a new experience that people think, wow, this is how I want to buy stuff or market stuff or get in touch.
Yeah. There was this new way that people were producing different audio formats called, I think it's autonomal. I might be saying it wrong, but essentially you can hear when someone's talking on the right side of your speaker versus the left, and a truck drives by, and you can hear it driving by just on one side. And so it feels like you're in that environment, and kind of plays to what you're saying of what new things can you do that's just different. And that'd be pulling from maybe the media industry and pulling it into commerce in whatever experience or interactive, immersive event that you're building. How can you pull in different parts of it and make something unique that actually has people walking away and being like, wow, that was something I haven't experienced before. It's a cool way of thinking.
And try to keep it simple, don't, when you've got a Christmas tree, you don't have to throw in every ball that the shop has, it looks much nicer if you make a nice configuration of that,
Yeah, unless you have 4 kids, and then it just gets wild. Every year now I'm like, oh, my Christmas tree used to be so cute before kids, and now it's just not great.
Well, that's also a good analogy, of course. If you got 4 kids, then the Christmas tree starts looking like that,
Yeah. Until they get older and they have good design principles. And And so the article you mentioned was called Daedalus Project. Is that what you said?
Out of the best of my memory, if you search for Nick Yee Stanford, I don't know where he works now. If you look him up, but he was I used his principles in 2004 to sort of look it up and say, okay, and not so much I looked at it as a direct, you need to do one-on-one, but more like a framework. Does the framework make sense? And I turned it into my own framework a little bit with these things. But in the end, I have to give, his due, because he did the research. He did, I think, tens of thousands of people in World of Warcraft he interviewed, and virtual worlds back in the days. And then you think, isn't that outdated, Barry? Well, to be honest, if you play Destiny nowadays or any of the other virtual worlds, all that, it's Fortnite, in a certain way, they all do the same thing. For instance, sorry, I stopped.
Now that you're kind of touching on the newer games, is there anything happening in that industry right now where you're like, oh, that's actually is kind of breaking out of those 3 principles, or that is a different way that, this game is trying something out? Anything that you actually think could work though?
Yeah. I think the needs and how you fill them in on primary, secondary, won't change because it's human needs. It's not so much technology,
Mhm.
you know, but like technology
Yep.
enablement allows you to maybe reach deeper towards a certain niche, you know, like love these things, you know, whether it's a Pico, you
What
know,
is it? Hold it up.
just a VR headset, like one of those, you know,
Oh, okay.
and I got a whole range of
Mhm.
those things. And even
What do you do with them? What are you doing with the headsets? Like, where are you going in the
I
world?
think in 2013, we were one of the first to work on a Kickstarter project with Audi and Oculus. Actually, how do you use VR in showrooms? I think we got up to
Yeah.
600 showrooms. Problem was how to get 600 PCs in 600 showrooms, keep them updated and all those things. So in comes
Yep.
2022. Finally, we have something called Cloud XR where those headsets need to have like a line and a box. I think I do remember one of the SVPs asked me, Barry, what do we need to do to make it work? I said, remove the line, remove the box. I said, that's the easiest thing. And that was in 2015. Since then, I've been working with Qualcomm, NVIDIA, Amazon, you know, Ericsson lately. You know, I like to say, how do we remove that? But if you put them on, sometimes they're still a bit clunky, you know, and they're still heavy. They're a lot lighter than already a couple of years ago. And I'm pretty sure if you talk to some of the older guards, you know, they used to wear those helmets which were 20 kilos, you know, I don't know. I never was there.
Yep.
And what these things allow you to do is actually stand in the space and immerse yourself in space. You go to a Lucid showroom, they've got like a whole VR setup in there. No, it's not called a showroom. I should call it Lucid Studio. You go there and they have like a bug standing there. You can immerse yourself in the car, sitting in the car, walking around the car while wearing a headset. So that means, okay, there's a physical car there, so you can feel the paint, you can touch the paint. There's like samples of it. But if you want to immerse yourself, what does the car look like? Well, on a beach, in a desert, in a night scene. That's a different way of how a product is represented. You know, like a product is not always on a white background with the right lighting. A car can be standing at night in your driveway and your paint might look different then. I would say in the range of immersion, it allows for a much stronger level of immersion. You know, the goosebumps you get from your first good VR experience is incredible because for the first time you are in a virtual world and you're taking part in it instead of like sitting back in it and playing vault mode, basically. And that's for commerce just as good. But like what the problem with that is, and we've worked on that from the start, we've never released anything that wasn't what we call comfortable technology. And comfortable technology is the first KPI to do it right, meaning it is ready to be shown in front of an audience instead of just people wow, because like people used to do things that people got sick out of it and I never want to do it.
I know.
Comfortable technology, KPI
Yep,
one, then the next one is again conversion, engagement, fits.
So do you think we're there now where it's like people can use this technology and actually feel good? Because I've actually had a couple of those experiences when trying out different VR headsets and experiences when I was back in my Google days. And I definitely remember walking away and being like, whew, that was intense. And it definitely felt real, but I also feel a little bit sick from just how I was moving around and looking at things and my eyes weren't adjusting quick
That's
enough,
true.
I guess.
No, but you're absolutely right. If you don't design right, again, there are other design principles, you know, there's design principles like on the technology side, you know, your frame rate needs to be correct, you know, like it cannot be just 60, you have to have up to 90 or you're faking 90 by doing double 45 or even more, you know, like that. Those are principles, but they're same principles as if you let people move in a thing and you move them without walking and then you're standing and you feel almost like you're on one of those skateboards that isn't moving. That's what makes sick as well. And if you move too fast with people, you need to diminish the eyesight so that people are not, that it doesn't move too fast here, because like on the outer edges of your eye, it's actually creating more of that sickness than just on in the start of your eye, you know, like those kind of things. So if you use the right kind of principles, you can create comfortable technology. And as long as it then helps 100%, because like when you sell a car, you don't want one person walking away from you, you know, like 100% it has to be comfortable. Then it can help actually sell and market the car. If it drives, like for instance, I think the first real commercial after we finally got out of lots and lots of trials and stuff like that, where we were doing mass was around 2015, I think, or 2016. And we were getting into the hundreds of them. And that's where, for instance, Audi said like, it's good enough now, you know, like, and And with
hmm
Lucid, like it's good enough, or it's good enough, it's good, it's great. Like it's a
Yep.
great tool to sell. So that's there today. What isn't there today is that the wide adoption rate of those headsets. What isn't there today is
hmm
currently doing that via the cloud, so that where there is a wider range of adoption rate with these kind of things, and hopefully it grows faster with lots more coming out, that it can just go anywhere. Like we have a
hmm
new generation of GPU servers coming out. We have a lot higher bandwidth with G5. Wi-Fi standards have improved the last few years. So yes, there's another conversion point. We're on the edge today. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's epic. I want to hear about maybe a project that you've worked on that maybe got way more engagement than you ever expected. Like you built it and you're like, I don't know if this is really going to be like that great. It's kind of a test, it's an experiment. And then maybe it had way better user adoption. The client was like really happy with something that was kind of an experiment to you all. So, I mean, it feels like you guys are kind of startup-y, experimenting, trying a lot of things, moving to different industries. And I'm sure there has to be an interesting story of you guys putting out an experiment and being surprised
Yes.
with the results.
Yes. Partly surprised, partly hopefully not, because we were, like in the end, just as in the gaming industry, you test, and then you're releasing. Like when you were in the app industry, like you would go to New Zealand, test out there, and then you would go to America, like that kind of stuff. Like, and later on when that became too
Yeah.
expensive, you went to other countries which had like lower ad rates, and then you would go there. But you would test, and if it was not good enough, you would throw it away and do again. Like what we've done with a couple of OEMs, like, and let me name the last one, because it's public knowledge, like, so I can talk about it. Like what we did with Lucid is like when I spoke with them and when I spoke with the current people leading the project there, like Thomas Holograms and also the senior vice president of design, Derek Jenkins, they were such thought leaders in what they wanted. Like they were not just saying, I want your technology, but they said like, I see that your technology allows me to do what I want, and that is represent my product in such a way that it can be seen how it was designed. Like, so if you zoom in on a very small detail in the chair in one of the Lucid configurators, you can see the California bear next to the stitches almost, like that's the level
Oh,
of
that's
detail
cool.
that you can do. And there was one thing. So their considerations matched our technology. I think that's important. Like if it's just technology for technology's sake, every project fails. So I think, but always when you see somebody so matching with you, you're pleasantly surprised because you always hope for it, but you never go for it, like that kind of stuff. And then coming out of that, or still being in that project, of course, and being there as a partner, like, but seeing the results, which are public, like, where we've got higher engagement, higher conversion, higher transactional value of people actually immersing themselves with platforms like that than traditional ones. And not just a little bit, but really plus 50%. That's the result that you can just say, okay, it was not just a very pleasant collaboration, but it was also a very pleasant result. So that was good. And then we started building on top of that. So instead of just, like I said, with the Christmas tree, instead of saying, here's the Christmas tree and hang everything in, at one point we had something and you say, look, okay, what's missing from the tree? You start adding some things. And that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years, and more is added so that it's good framework and that builds them towards the future. And also towards the moment where they started delivering the first cars, like the platform grew with them. And at the same time, if you see maybe another case where Volkswagen uses the same platform to not launch their brand and their platform, but actually help represent the car in so many different ways in, I don't know, 30, 40 odd countries, like with all their different needs, is where we've given them a backend, say, you can do whatever you want. You don't need us as your restricting factor. And they come up with lots of different cases. Every country has their own needs. And every time somebody comes up with that, you go, oh, that's cool. Like, yeah. Cheers.
Wow, that's cool. Okay, so where do you see the industry heading then over the next like 1 to 2 years? What are you most excited to see hopefully play out?
It's funny because like I've been talking about so much experience things and so you might think it's a little bit dull, but I'm actually most interested in integration with backends. Backends.
Wait, with what?
Like Like, let's say a
Okay.
CRM platform, like a Salesforce, an ERP platform,
hmm
like an SAP,
hmm
or if they do CRM, other partners like dealer software. And the reason why that is
Yeah.
the moment that commerce or experiences become directly attached to the existing commerce platforms, that is
hmm
where everybody adopts at a much faster rate, not just the consumers, but also the people within the companies. And once they start saying, oh, it's
Yep.
not that difficult, and oh, it's just an API connection. It's not magic. It's not black magic or something, because sometimes you feel, oh, it's black magic. It's too difficult for me, or
Yeah.
I shouldn't be doing that. So I get very excited that maybe it's less sexy, but I think for the adoption rate of things, it's going to matter. And that's why I'm
hmm
happy about that one. Where
Yeah. I
I
like that.
feel, XR is going to take a massive flight, but then again, I'm a huge fan, so I might be too much of a fanboy. But yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
hmm So tell me that if you're getting those platforms to work together, I mean, we can use Salesforce
Mhm.
as an example. There are lovely sponsors of the show, so I'm always
Mhm.
going to talk about them. Tell me what that looks like of like, what does a perfect integration and experience look like to where, a brand can come and be like, yep, I want to use this in a way that they trust it and it works. Like, what does that look like when you're
Yeah.
working with like a Salesforce and
Oh,
making
that's
that
good. Yeah.
happen?
Like if you think about Sales Cloud, for instance, Sales Cloud is your typical vanilla CRM platform. Like somebody called to a call center, and the information is filled in the back end, and there's name, there's like last name, first name, and it's whatever you fill in from a customer. But at the same time, if you have a product and you have product needs, we automatically add to that conversation what kind of colors they looked at, what kind of cars they looked at. So there's a whole range of user behavior, or what the customer wants to keep, linked to QR code so they
hmm
can look at it themselves as well, which is then automatically stored in the backend. And it can look like a picture, can look like a video, can look like an AR. Yeah? Take that same
Yep.
representation, now not for B2B or a backend or a call center employee or somebody on the web team, but then the customer itself who wants a virtual takeaway from that same conversation that person might have at a website, or maybe in a retail space, like interacting with digital. They get a virtual takeaway, which is heavily personalized towards what they looked at. So they're not, let's say you've got 20 callers, but they only looked at 5. You don't need a brochure with 20 callers. You need one with 5. And maybe with another recommendation, hey, have you thought about this? So there's out of that same tool, you can use, for instance, Marketing Cloud. You can use a marketing automation, and you could use Marketing Cloud to send out a virtual takeaway that represents the same thing as in the Sales Cloud backend. And that represents the same thing as, and maybe was configured in Commerce Cloud, where they configured a certain
Yep.
part of the car. And those platforms together, they all use visual representation of of that car, store it somewhere in bits and bytes, or as an object, depending on how you want to store it the most efficiently. That depends on those platforms. And in the end, help the customer make decisions, make them happy that they received the color they looked at. It's never going to be a conversation. Oh, yeah, I saw a certain green. And then somebody says, is it this green? No, it's not that green. No, they both look at the same type of green, like simple things like that.
Yep.
And once you start matching, data has 3 pillars, basically. Yeah? There's like handover between platforms. Like if I do something, I want the data to go from platform to platform, because I as a customer expect you to know what I choose. Yeah. Then there's business
Yep.
intelligence. So for instance, Salesforce has Tableau as well, like one of their business intelligence platforms. And people want to see a report. What color was most chosen? Now, they not say red, but you show the red next to it. So that's business intelligence. And then the last bit of data is like machine to machine. It's basically what we call machine learning, AI, that kind of stuff. So platform to platform, business intelligence, machine to machine. And then you can start saying to people, for instance, they don't want to click on the red, but you might hint towards them, hey, have you thought about opening the door? And if they open the door, there's a faster journey towards like the buying experience. We did one of those setups as well with one of our car companies. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. I love that example. It helped me think through every
Mhm.
stage of it, which is really, really cool to hear about. Okay, so my last thing, I want to kind of pivot away from the
Mhm.
industry and go into
Oh,
Barry's life. I want to hear what comes to mind when I say tsunami and how that maybe changed the course of your
Oh, wow. How
life.
do you know that? No.
I've been doing
Oh,
my
yeah, yeah.
research, Barry.
I think it changed the course of my life or our lives, like my family's life in a way that, uh, hey, oh, wow, that's a good question. Like
Yeah, paint the picture. Where were
when
we
we're
at?
in
What
the
was
middle of that,
happening?
like I think we were in the middle of Khao, which was like in Thailand when the wave hit it in the
Hmm.
morning, like we woke up and wave came by, and thankfully we were high up on a dune. So when we ran out, like
Hmm.
we did what most people did, try to help other people, try to grab hold of them and get them out of the water and get them to safety. And that was like an hour,
Yep.
2 hours of like running around and just grabbing people up and dumping them in trucks and letting them drive away. And I do remember at one point being back in safety, that we were the last to leave that area. We were going up a hill and I was sitting beneath a waterfall, and I was always having a heat stroke
Hmm.
because I was wearing my diving shoes from diving into the water to try and grab somebody else. And then I was sitting there, and of course I couldn't get my heat off. So I was just sitting under that waterfall, and this was crazy. And only later we realized that we were there and instinctively we were doing, I think, the right things, and also later on we stayed there, we helped out people in hospitals and that kind of stuff. So it helped us come over maybe what would have been a trauma otherwise, and so
Hmm.
instinctively we did the right choices, but we also felt like we maybe, if we would have known a bit better what to do, we could have helped better, so, and I don't know why the church made, but afterwards we became part of the lifeguards in the Netherlands where we lived back then. And we did
Hmm.
that for quite a few years until our daughter was born, because like that, like you have to spend your time in that. That was one, I think, direction of what life took us. At the same time,
Hmm.
at that point, I was working in corporate and I was like doing like data and, like I love data science. Absolutely enjoy that. But I was missing some components where it was going to. At the same time, some of my best friends were building like computer games, and they said like, "Hey, why don't you come in and actually help us build a virtual world?" Like, so what nowadays we
Hmm.
talk about metaverses, in 2004 were called MMORPGs, and people were walking around like elves and orcs and that kind of stuff. They still do, like, and you were trying to build that. And I said, okay, why don't we combine data and that kind of stuff? And I said, like, I want to step out of corporate. I want to become part of a startup, and I want to help build something that's the next stage, like, so I think
Hmm.
in a way it helped us make life choices faster, but
Yep.
thankfully it didn't damage us. We saw a lot of like like sadness, grief, and thankfully we
Hmm.
were able to help, I don't know, as many people as we could, like, yeah, that can, afterwards we thought we did the right thing on at most of the steps. One of the things, I was with Orange. Orange was one of the telco providers there, but because they were not being
Hmm.
used that much, for some weird reason, somebody said they need to be the telco provider there. And because they were not reached that much, that telecom mast was still free. So I could let everybody call towards their family who were with
Hmm.
us back then, because it was not overused to the BTS yet. And, like all
Hmm.
these little things mattered at that moment. Communication,
Oh,
like not being able to
yep.
communicate and only hearing 12 hours later through world radio, because like there was nothing else there anymore, like what was really go. But yeah, we can go on for hours. I think,
Yeah. No, I mean, that's why I wanted to hear the story because I just heard a little snippet of it. I'm like, I mean, yeah, not only having so many reasons to cherish everything around you, but then also change the trajectory of your life and hop into a whole new thing. Yeah, all that was, I was like, I need to hear the story from
yeah,
Barry firsthand.
well, I think in the end, like it gives you perspective. Be careful not to start. I don't know what the English term for it is, because I've never used it anymore since I talked through it. But like, is relative it? Like it's sort of like once something happens like that, some people say, "Oh,
Oh,
it,
yeah,
it
it's all
was me,
relative.
and why
Mhm.
was it me that was saved and that kind of stuff." So you have to sort of like very quickly go through that phase, like that. And at that point, like, it really helps to talk with a professional. It was one of the few times in my life that
Yep.
I really talk with a professional for that kind of thing. Like I love working with
Mhm.
professionals in every skill set. Like with, yeah. Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Yeah, thank you very much for
Mhm.
sharing that. And really good story. I wanted to, just hear a bit more about. So Barry, I really loved having you on the podcast today. I really like thinking about the gaming industry and all the principles that can be applied. It's such a different train of thought that I actually want to go down the wormhole and check out that blog post or paper that was written. So thanks for being a great guest. And until then, where can people learn more about you?
And thanks, Stephanie, for making this available to me. And if people want to know more, of course, they can they can find me on LinkedIn. P Hoffman NL, I believe it is. And of course they can go to ZeroLight.com, ZeroLight.com. That's I think the best space. If you reach out to info there's always somebody reacting. We always take time with people to find out how technology works best. We love speaking with people about their problem statements, not necessarily problems, but problem statements, their needs, their thoughts for the new year, their thoughts for the future, and see if it can fit. And sometimes we just love talking technology. So even if there's no fit at all, just reach out, I'll make time. Cheers.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much, Barry.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
If you're looking for the #1 platform for all things commerce, there's no better choice. So definitely go check it out at salesforce.com/commerce.